So I'm sitting here with Diane, who I met yesterday, and we were talking about where I came from, and she said, oh, I've flown into St. Martin many times. Well, little did I know that she had literally flown into St. Martin. So I appreciate that Diane is going to share her ultimate travel story with us today.
Taking my chances along with my dreams.
At the time that I was flying into St. Martin, I was a co-pilot. We were on a very powerful, great aircraft. It's a Boeing 757. And St. Martin has an interesting runway. It's rather short. It's always hot, and it's a one-way in, one-way out. When you take off, there's mountains. So if you ever had an emergency, there's a pretty complicated procedure not to hit the mountains. Yeah. But with the 757, it was an excellent aircraft, and it could do the job very easily. One of the I guess things that I remember the most is the captains always used to let the co-pilots do the flying into St. Martin. And I didn't understand why until we came over the fence and all the ladies are topless holding onto the fence as we come right over the fence, and they could kind of get a quick look at some of the good-looking ladies. While we were very busy flying the aircraft, landing on a short strip.
Oh my gosh, that's too funny.
For takeoff, we would go to the end of the runway. It's one way in, one way out. And the fence was right at the end of the runway. Chain link fence, very sandy, and if you needed a face peel, you would hang on to the fence, close your eyes, because when we would spool up and go to full power for takeoff, it would blow the sand, and that way they would get their face peel. People were crazy. People were absolutely crazy, hanging on to the fence, thinking that it was something smart to do when a very powerful 55,000 horsepower engine is blowing sand in their face.
Yeah, that's definitely a crazy thing to do.
Yeah.
And you've been in St. Martin when the big jumbos used to...
We used to watch British Air come in. And when British Air would come in with a 747, they would touch down at the end of the runway. It was called a maximum effort stop, maximum reverse, and they would be pushing on the brakes, the binders, right to the end of the runway. When they would taxi back to the gate, they had to install giant fans to cool the brakes. Otherwise, it would take up to 4 to 6 hours to cool them if they just were air drying, if you will. So,
wow,
our aircraft didn't require that. We weren't that big. We only had a couple hundred people, not the 747. But we used to sit there just amazed and, like the people hanging on the fence.
Yeah.
It was kind of fun to watch. Ooh, let's see how this goes.
That is pretty amazing for sure. But you told me how old you were when you flew for the first time, you started flying.
My dad introduced me when I was 7 years old. He got a wild hair, and I'm trying to think of how old he was. He was probably in his 30s. And the day he soloed, he bought an aircraft. He came home. I was, Daddy's little girl. And he said, Daddy bought an airplane. You want to go see it? So we took off to the airport. And as I'm sitting in his used aircraft, not new, I said, Daddy, let's go fly. And he said, sweetheart, I can't. I'm a student driver. I don't have my license yet. Well, at 7 years old, little girls can wrap their fathers pretty much around their pinkies. So I did the old quiver of the lip and said, Daddy, we gotta go fly. So he looked right, he looked left. We went flying, and that was like so illegal. So we flew around, and he took us over the house. We buzzed the house, and then we landed safely. Everything was fine. So when I got home, I announced to my mom, Mommy, we went flying. Well, she was helping my father study for all his, and she knew all the rules. So he was so busted. I mean,
oh no.
So I didn't get to fly until he had his license. And I thought I was being punished. You know, he'd come home and I would like attack him and just go, Daddy, let's go fly. I just loved it. From the second I was in that aircraft. In fact, I asked him if I could take off and land.
Wow. You are the adventurer.
There was no fear. I was with my dad.
Yeah.
It was,
exactly.
you know, you're never afraid when it's like getting in a car.
How
So-
exciting. So tell us a little bit more about your career in flying, because I know you've flown different aircrafts and
Throughout, into my college years, the military, the glamour of fighters, women were not in combat at that time. So what I didn't know about the military was, you know, could fill a library. So when it was time where I thought I could go into the military, I went into an Air Force recruiter, and I came in there, and then I announced to him that I want to be a fighter pilot. And he asked me, he said, have you looked in the mirror lately? And I was like, well, what do you mean? He says, you're a female. And I said, well, what does that have to do with it? I mean, we can't fly. He goes, no, you can't go into combat. So we can't train you to fly fighters, you know, and not go into combat. I said, I'll go into combat. He goes, no, you won't. So that killed the military for me. I went the civilian route, and throughout my career, while going to college, the aspiration to be an airline pilot was slim to none. Back then, worldwide, they just didn't have, the percentage was so small in the airlines. And when the hiring boom came up, I had flown for a lot of different companies any way I could. I mean, I would fly for free. I was trying to get experience in the larger aircraft without, you know, it's like, can I drive your Porsche? Yeah, no. I'll do it for free if you'll let me drive it around your neighborhood. Just to get experience, I would fly at night, flying freight as a co-pilot for no money. I slept in hangars. It didn't matter. Whatever I had to do, when I finally got enough experience and all of a sudden the airlines started to hire, I got very lucky and I flew for a Log Air. It was a 4-engine Lockheed Electric. For all these young ones out here, go ahead and Google it. No, they don't fly them anymore. But anyway, I got hired as one of the first women that actually got through the training. There was another lady that was a aircraft mechanic on C-141s that was not a pilot, but we had the same check ride as the mechanics. So without her helping me, I never would have passed, because it was, you know, there was so much maintenance involved, learning and just, you know, tearing apart engines, and it was very different than it is today. Today they realize you're not going to go out and work on them, you know, let's concentrate more on flying. But because of her expertise helping me study, I mean, we burned the midnight hour oil. And when I got the oral exam out of the way, then finally got in the aircraft, flying was very easy for me because that's all I've ever done. I mean, I did aerobatics, I did gliders, I did, you know, and then finally got into the large transport aircraft. When we got done with that company actually it went bankrupt. It's just another very small company that was operating on a shoestring. But I got furloughed, and then I actually had an interview with Eastern, Delta, American, United, and Piedmont, all in the same 6-month time period. So you had to fly the simulator, you had, all this interviewing that you had to go through. And it was very interesting to go for the interview because you didn't want to seem masculine, but you can go in feminine. So there was this really fine line that you had to kind of walk, and I had a friend of mine advise me on how to dress. And he said, no open collar. You want to come in to, you're not going to be flying in this for the actual verbal part of the interview. You want to wear a skirt. You don't want to be in pants, but the skirt can't be above your knee. You don't want to be in high heels. You don't want to be having nail polish and a bunch of makeup on. But you want to look, you don't want to be masculine, but you don't want to be feminine. So I went through several of the interviews, and I actually had my choice between Eastern Airlines and Piedmont. Eastern Airlines was about to go Chapter 11 and then liquidate. And another friend of mine that was a United captain advised me, he said, go with Piedmont Airlines. So that's how I ended up choosing, and I'll never forget, I called my father and I said, I've decided to go with Piedmont Airlines. And he says, why aren't you going with a real airline? He said, what's a Piedmont? He says, what about Eastern Airlines? And I said, no, this friend Gary, he's deceased now, but he said, no, go with Piedmont, you won't be sorry. So I got hired with Piedmont and started as an engineer in the 727, then went to the right seat, flew that for another 6 months, went into the 737, Boeing, love Boeing equipment. And then in 3.5 years, the progression was so quick, upgrading from co-pilot, I made captain. And there was a group of ladies that contacted me, and they said, would you like to be part of the ISA, it's called ISA 21 ladies captain group. And I ended up meeting with them, and we were 100 ladies worldwide that were captains. And I was number 50 in the world, with 121 carrier being airline, including, like, if you were to throw in FedEx, and they're still 121 carriers. But, I was, that's how old I am. One of 50 worldwide that was a female captain. So we busted through a couple of glass ceilings for sure.
Yeah.
But we didn't know any different because it was just we were part of the group with the boys. If you could fly, yeah, and you had to be able to fly. We always had to jump over a little higher hurdle to be a little extra better, And fortunately, I'm a perfectionist and won't really accept anything less. But and that has always helped my flying career because I always wanted to do it perfectly. So that was, and I spent 35 years with the airlines. So,
That's incredible.
9/11 came along. There's a lot of bad things that happen in throughout my career with seeing the company go up, bankrupt, up, down, a lot of furloughs, and somehow I ended up staying, out of the furlough group, and it grew, and then they finally became American Airlines, which is a gigantic corporation, and I retired, and I love retirement. When people say, do you miss it? I missed a lot of Christmases, I missed a lot of birthdays, I missed a lot of anniversaries, but fortunately my husband could come with me as a non-rev, so he always seemed to tag along and celebrate, and
So that worked out for the holidays.
It did, but still, you're away from home. You live in a suitcase, and it's not. You don't fly one leg and then let's go see Paris. It doesn't work that way.
It's all work when you fly.
It is. I mean, you're not on holiday. You're working.
Yeah. I know what I said. So you must have loved flying. You said I did, but I'm also loving retirement. I totally understand it. And you have flown all over the world.
Yes. Yep. From Tel Aviv, all over Europe. Been into Kuala Lumpur. That's another whole total airplane story. Was involved with a gentleman and his family from Switzerland that created and built an aircraft, and it eventually was sold to the Malaysian government, and I was part of that routine. That was really fascinating.
Interesting.
But yeah.
So, and were you RVing before your retirement? Because I have met you through RVing.
Yes. My husband and I have been together under roof for 30 years, and when we've had all kinds of, we've had coaches, we've had fifth wheels, we've had tag-alongs, we've had slide-ins, we've had, you name it, we've had it. And because I could fly into any airport, he would take off for almost 8 months out of the year, and I would basically call him up and say, what state are you in? So,
and he'd meet up with an RV.
Yeah, and then he'd pick me up. So, in fact, he bought, I think there was a trucker's guide to airports. Asked me out. Yeah, a big rig guide to getting in and out of airports because he had to tote and pick me up. Either that or I take a taxi to the nearest place where I could, meet him and he'd pick me up.
Wherever he was parked.
Yeah. So we have RV'd for many, many years.
And now you spend how much of the year are you RVing?
Right now, my husband just went through a very serious back surgery last year. We've been out of the RVing for 3 years due to his back problem. We just shined up the Bigfoot and back at it. We were actually, after this little rundown of Florida, we were going to head over to Texas, go to the Big Bend area. I think we're just, this is a good shakedown. We're heading back out spring. We love Montana. Go up to a friend's ranch that has 17,000 acres in Zortman, Montana, which is about 130 miles north of Billings, 60 miles south of Malta. And we dry camp a lot. We're not afraid to go out, fire up the generator. So probably I would say 2 to 3 months out of the year we're RVing. We're on the road.
Wonderful. Mm-hmm. Still a big travel life for you. So from the air to the ground. But that's. And when I first started talking to you about flying, I was telling you my niece is going to be a pilot. So I'm going to share all your information with her. You have such a great story. I mean, I love travel, so I love to hear a travel story. But now I heard what a powerful, empowering woman, and that's even.
I'm not the trailblazer, believe me. Fortunately, there were.
You were part of it.
There was a few, trees we had to cut down to get through, but there were a lot of ladies that got through, and I can say that one company I was a first, but if my advice to anybody that wants to become a pilot right now, there's a tremendous shortage. The military, if you go the military way, which is always a good thing, it's excellent training, but if there's a lot of different ways to get into commercial aviation, and I would definitely say now is the time to do it. It's going to take a few years. You don't just take a few lessons and climb into an airline seat, but there are ways to do it, and the foreseeable future is, I think, very good. We had a lot of retirements happen after 9/11 and then COVID, and hopefully we've got the world back on its axis again, with the different vaccines, and travel is up again.
Yeah.
But I know, and I have a lot of people that are friends that I still associate with that are in scheduling, and they're always short of pilots. So is that going to hold through the next few years? There's no crystal ball, but it looks like if you were a surfer, start paddling now, because there's a good wave to catch. And I would definitely, it's a great career. I mean, it's not for everybody. If they say there's no seats available in the United States, well, there are other countries that you can go and fly for. When we were at our most desperate time after 9/11, I actually put in, because I thought I was going to lose my career, and I wasn't ready to retire back then. I put in applications all over the world, and because I was a check airman, even though they didn't call us check air women, no problem. Check airmen, where we did training and check rides, and that's another whole story. They were going to hire me if I could breathe. I was hired.
Wow.
So, I think the foreseeable future is still available for the younger generation to do that. And going through the military is not a bad way. I mean, the training is excellent. You can get your education. You can get a heck of a retirement. And if you want to transition from, and you don't have to do fighters. I mean, you can do transport. There's a lot of, but you'll have a bed. You'll have always something to eat. And if you have to fly during times of where they need you, that's what you sign the document for. You have to raise your hand and do it. So I would have done it in a heartbeat. If they accepted women, if I could turn back the clock and be where I was, I would have been, oh my gosh, Top Gun. I would have been right in there.
Well, these are really good travel tips for anyone wanting to start into the industry. And I really appreciate you sharing your travel story and your RV story with us. And hey, we might meet you somewhere on the road.
Yes, ma'am.
So, yeah.
Go to
Thank
Montana.
you so much. We love Montana. Please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you will get our weekly videos. See you on the road.